So I broke the door to get in. Tears filled Noel's eyes. He was weirdly touched. Then fizzes of terror skirted along his skin. What if he had been dying? What would have happened if Ian hadn't busted into his room to wake him? Would the Blackbird have been able to take Noel to another, dimension, realm, level of hell? He realized Ian was waiting for him to say something. Thanks, Ian. I was stuck in a really nasty nightmare. You got me out of it. Ian shrugged. Well, good. It seemed pretty bad. He looked hard at Noel. Are you sure you're okay? Noel nodded. Nothing a hot shower and some food won't solve. He sat up. He tried to ignore the room spinning sensation that triggered a wave of nausea. Ian stood. Okay, well. Noel wasn't sure he could stand yet, so he didn't. Sorry about your door, Ian said. I can fix it for you. He strode to the door and looked at it. I just need to get a couple things from the hardware store. You don't need to do that. It's my fault you broke it. Ian shook his head. No, I want to. I like fixing things. It'll take my mind off the makeup test I have later today. I need to pass it so I can keep playing ball. No, Noel nodded. Let me know if you need any help with classwork. Ian looked closely at him, probably to see if Noel was jerking his chain. He wasn't. He might have been the day before, giving the dumb jock a hard time, but not today. Ian nodded. Thanks. He went through the now unguarded opening to Noel's domain. Ian? Noel called. Yeah? Ian turned. If you had to find someone from your past, like from junior high or something, what would you do? I mean, if they weren't online. I don't know. Do you know their parents? Noel snapped his fingers. That's brilliant. Yes, thanks. Great. Thanks again, Ian, for breaking in. Ian shrugged. Anytime. I hope not, Noel muttered when Ian went back to his own room. Noel stood, and for the second time that day, he headed for the showers. In the shower, he What? What is that word? I've never seen that word before. He did something to himself for being so dense. Yeah, I don't know that word. I'm sorry. He knew Christine Wilbur's parents were still in town because her dad owned Wilbur's Eats, a popular greasy spoon diner downtown. Now, could Noel have forgotten that? One of the things he'd often said to Christine when he was bullying her was, "So you've eaten everything on your dad's menu 1,000 times. What do you recommend?" Noel groaned at the memory and turned the water to cold. He flinched when the icy bite shocked his skin. But he both needed and deserved the jolt. It would help him do what he now needed to do. Noel was relieved to find Wilbur's Eats mostly empty when he arrived. Only one silver vinyl booth was taken by an elderly couple picking through scrambled eggs and hash browns. And only one red vinyl stool was occupied by a sleepy-looking guy in a janitor's uniform. He was drinking coffee and methodically, ploughing through a large piece of cherry pie. Lovely. The diner smelled like a diner. A good one. The aromas came from the food. Sorry, I'm like a little bit off right now because that line at the diner smell like a diner. It's like saying, "Oh, that apple is an apple. That apple tastes of apple." The aromas came from the food, a weird but not unpleasant mix of onions, fried chicken, apples, and chocolate, and the coffee, not from Greece. Clunking and sizzling sounds came from behind a low divider wall separating the dining room from the kitchen. There was a large pass-through for the food, and next to it hung one of those carousel things to clip orders to. It was empty. A thin woman with limp, dyed blonde hair turned to greet Noel when he entered. "Sit wherever you want." She waved a hand and returned to her chore, starting a new pot of coffee. The woman wore pinkish uniform dress and a bright blue apron. Her name tag read Lois. Noel didn't want to sit. He wanted to get on with it. So he approached the counter near an old-fashioned cash register. He shifted from one foot to the other. Lois turned and raised an eyebrow. "Did you want takeout?" "No, thank you. I need to see Mr. Wilbur. Is he here now?" Lois chuckled. "Sure he is. He practically lives here now. He does all the cooking." Lois rotated toward the kitchen and shouted, "Earl, get out here. Someone's asking for you." Noel clenched his fists. He wasn't looking forward to this conversation. He looked up and watched a very short man push through a swinging door to the right of the food pass-through. No wonder Noel hadn't gotten a glimpse of the man. He was barely 5 feet tall, and he was thin. That was a surprise. "Hello, sir." Noel held out his hand. "My name's Noel Markham." Earl Wilbur grinned and shook Noel's hand. "Good to meet you." Earl was missing a front tooth, but somehow that added to his friendly smile. Unlike his fair-haired daughter, Earl had brown hair and brown eyes, but Noel could see Christine in the man's face. Or would that be the other way round? Both had bow-shaped mouths, wide cheekbones, and close-set eyes. "What can I do for you?" Earl Wilbur asked. His manner was deferential. Noel had been thinking of a smooth way of bringing up the subject of finding Christine, and he hadn't come up with the thing. So he just burst out with it. "Sir, I need to find your daughter, Christine, and I was hoping you could tell me where she is." Earl Wilbur's friendly expression didn't change. He just said, "That right?" He leaned an elbow on the counter across from Noel. Noel noticed Earl Wilbur's forearm was cross-hatched with little burn scars. From short order cooking? "And why is that?" Earl asked. "You sweet on her?" Lois asked. Her voice was low and scratchy. Earl laughed and patted her shoulder. "Well now, Lois, I expect that's his business." Outside, the sun disappeared so abruptly everyone in the diner turned to look through the picture window. Black storm clouds were tumbling across the sky. Beneath the clouds, right outside the diner, a huge hunched and feathered form shuffled past. What? Noel did a double take. Had he just seen that, or had he imagined it? He looked around to check if anyone else had seen it. The elderly woman in the booth was looking past the elderly man's shoulder, her gaze focused on the clouds and her face pinched in what could have been fear or worry. But maybe she just didn't like storms. Whether he saw it or made it up, Noel had a feeling he needed to get a move on. Looking back at Christine's dad, Noel said, "I'm going to tell you the truth, even though it makes me look like really bad." But he shrugged. "I was in junior high with Christine, and I was a bully. I wasn't nice to her at all, and I need to tell her how sorry I am that I was so, mean to her." "Is this one of those make amends things?" Lois asked Noel. Not in any official way, I just need her to know I'm sorry." Earl Wilbur rubbed his jaw. "You're the boy who threw burrs at her?" Noel scrunched up his face in pure embarrassment. He looked down. "Yeah, that was me." When Earl Wilbur didn't say anything, Noel looked up at the man. He expected to see anger in the man's eyes, but all he saw was compassion. Earl Wilbur held his gaze for several seconds. Noel squirmed, but he didn't break off the connection. He had to face what he'd done. What better way than looking his victim's father in the eye? Finally, Earl Wilbur said, "Okay, I'll tell you where she is." "She's such a sweet girl," Lois said. Noel ignored his sudden nausea and accepted the directions Earl Wilbur gave him. Then he went outside, making sure he didn't look up as he hurried to his car. Noel's car wasn't much of a car. Truthfully, it was basically a piece of junk on wheels. It was such a piece of junk, in fact, that Noel never admitted he even owned the car. He kept it at his grandfather's house, and he only drove it when necessary. When the car was built, many, many years before, it had been a cool car, but too many owners, too many miles, too many fender benders, and just plain too much time had turned the car into a barely hanging together collection of rusted red metal and engine parts that only just got managed most of the time to get Noel where he needs to go. Oh my god, that was such a long sentence. I'll read that again because that probably annoyed you. But too many owners, too many miles, too many fender benders, and just plain too much time had turned the car into a barely hanging together collection of rusted red metal and engine parts that only just managed most of the time to get Noel where he needed to go. That is a very long sentence. Today he was going to be pushing it. He only had to go about 35 miles, but the small campus where Christine was a sophomore, like Noel, was up in the mountains. The school was a music and arts college, according to Christine's dad. The storm clouds were still hanging around and they made Noel feel very, very nervous. Whenever he accidentally glanced up at the sky, he saw feathered wings beating the billowing clouds. He also kept seeing an immense black feathered shape shambling along in the wake of his straining vehicle. Every time that happened, he pushed the accelerator pedal harder, which didn't help at all because he already had it pressed to the floor. Noel's car was struggling, predictably, with the uphill drive. After about 50 minutes, however, Noel arrived at a fancy modern cement archway over a narrow road that led into a small collection of glass and cement sculptural structures that nearly sang out, artsy. As Earl Wilbur had instructed, Noel followed the road to the left as it wove through two inverted triangle-shaped buildings and took Noel right into the parking lot of an asymmetrical 4-story dorm. As soon as Noel turned off his car, thunder rumbled in the not nearly far enough way distance. A big drop of water hit Noel's arm as he got out of the car. Refusing to look around, he trotted toward the dorm, but even without seeing his oppressor, he knew it was there. He could hear the laborious lugging of feathers across the pavement, and he could feel the air currents behind and around him shift as his hunter closed in. Noel was sweating by the time he got inside the dorm. The nausea that had started in the diner had grown and been joined by a pounding headache. Now Noel was starting to feel lightheaded. He had to hurry. Practically running through a sprawling lounge, his shoulder blades tingling with the sensation of being tracked, Noel glanced at a few girls sprawled on plush sectional sofas, chattering away. Oddly, he realized as he put the lounge behind him that he had no idea what the girls looked like or what they were wearing. He felt like his eyesight was getting blurry. The building smelled like cloves, and it was remarkably quiet for a dorm. Only the faintest hint of a What is that? Staccato. Only the faintest hint of a staccato beat can be heard from a distance. It was a little after 5 p.m. and Earl Wilbur had told Noel that Christine was nearly always in her dorm that time of the day because she ate early before going to practice. Earl didn't say what kind of practice. Noel easily found the room number Earl had given him. Leaning against the wall to steady himself, Noel raised a hand and knocked. "Come in," a cheerful musical voice called. It sounded a little like Christine, but it was too upbeat to be her. Noel opened the door, looking around the room, and froze, staring. The room had only one person in it, a girl, and the girl was obviously Christine. He might have doubted that if he hadn't just been with Earl Wilbur, but this girl had her dad's features, if not colouring. Christine was still as blonde and freckled as she'd been in high school, but she still had the slightly crooked teeth he remembered, but otherwise she was a very different Christine Wilbur. "Hi, are you looking for Claire?" "Huh? My roommate." Noel shook his head. He was having trouble staying upright. His legs felt weak, and something pushed against his back and down on his shoulders as if trying to pile him into the floor. "Then who are you looking for?" Christine asked. She twisted her nose in the twitchy way she did when they were in junior high, but she didn't seem to see anything behind Noel. He tried to tell himself for the 100th time that he was imagining things. When Noel didn't answer, Christine said, "I think you have the wrong room." She tilted her head with a sentence question. Christine sat at a school desk similar to Noel's. She had a book open in front of her and she held a plastic container of salad. It was nearly empty. When Noel didn't answer Christine, she looked down and forked up a cucumber. She bit into the cucumber and its distinctive scent filled the air. So did her crunching sounds. Noel kept staring. Apologies. Christine Wilbur sat cross-legged on her desk chair, and one of her bare feet kept time with music that must have been in her head. She wasn't wearing earbuds. She was dressed in a full-length, skin-tight light blue leotard. Christine Wilbur wasn't overweight anymore. She was obviously as fit as Noel was. That wasn't the only way she was different. Although she still had the same facial features and quirky expressions, Christine held herself with an air of confidence that made it clear she was a very different girl from the one he'd known in junior high. Noel's mental processes were struggling to keep up with the unexpected information. His neural pathways were announcing, "This input does not compute." "Do you talk?" Christine asked. She hesitated and worked her mouth as if trying to find the right words. Then she said, "I'm not being mean or anything, it's just that you're standing there and staring." She clasped her hands together and shrugged. Noel shook his head to try and reset his circuits. "You don't remember me?" he asked. "That's the first thing you say?" Christine laughed. He remembered that laugh, sorry. He'd only heard it once in junior high, when he'd watched her play with a ferret someone had brought to show and tell. Her laugh was a pleasing trill that made you want to laugh too. She set down her salad. "Okay, let's see." She stared at him, then shook her head. "No, I don't remember you. Should I?" "I would." "You would what?" "I'd remember me. If I were you, I mean." Noel pressed his hands to his forehead. Christine shrugged again. "Why don't you just tell me who you are?" Noel blew out air. "Okay." A couple girls came down the hall behind Noel. They were singing at the top of their lungs. He waited until they were well past, trying to ignore the fact that they'd been followed by that swishing, thumping sound that told him his feathered nemesis was nearby. He opened his mouth, and he found he couldn't get the words out. His eyes filled with tears, and he had to swallow. Christine frowned. "Hey, are you okay?" Noel's eyes got even wetter. She was so nice. "I was the guy who bullied you in junior high." He said the words fast, sort of like peeling off of a guilt bandage. "Which one?" Christine asked. Noel blinked. She shrugged and twitched her nose. "The hate on Christine crew was pretty big. I started the shh thing, and I threw burrs on you." Noel felt like he was about an inch tall. He could understand why he'd ever thought it was so funny, either when he did it or when he told Sam about it. "Oh, that was you?" She focused her small blue eyes on him. "I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name." "Noel Markham." She nodded. "I think I remember you. You didn't have all that hair then. You were skinnier too. No muscle." Noel blushed. He'd been pretty slight in junior high. What had made him think he was so great he could make fun of someone else? He wiped his still wet eyes. Christine stood and skipped across the room toward him so quickly it was like she flew. She was extraordinarily elegant and precise in her movement. Noel stiffened, not sure what she was going to do. She hugged him. This wasn't at all how he thought this would go. At first, Noel just stood there, his arms rigid at his sides, but then the combination of her sincere kindness and the honey-sweet scent of her hair released him from his resistance. He hugged her back, blinking away his tears. Christine let him go and stepped away. She was so close, he could see all her freckles and a few dark flecks in her blue eyes. "That wasn't an I forgive you hug," she said. "It was a thank you." "What?" Christine motioned for him to come into the room, and he did, sitting on her roommate's desk chair when Christine pulled it out. She returned to her desk, sat, and rotated her chair to face Noel. Clasping her hands together, she said, "I'm not going to tell you this to let you off the hook for bullying, but it looks like you really are sorry." "I really am," Noel said sincerely. He was surprised by how truly sorry he was. She nodded, thought for a few seconds, then said haltingly, "I'm going to tell you this, just because I learned something from it, and I figure maybe I can pass it on. In junior high, my mum was always on my case about everything. I felt like crap about myself. You and the others kept putting me down, which also didn't help. To be honest, I barely remember you, but I remember how bad I felt all the time. Eventually, though, I stopped feeling bad and I got angry. I decided to treat myself well. I like to dance, and I started dancing to have fun, just alone in my bedroom. But then I started going to a real studio, and I found out that I'm actually pretty good at it. When the music swept me up, nothing else mattered. Of course, my mum loved that dancing helped me lose weight, but that wasn't enough to make her happy. I think part of me will always struggle on some level with that. Noel stood, opened his mouth to protest. She came over and waved him off. Don't. It's okay. See? That's the thing. All the bullying forced me to step up and love myself, no matter what I see in the mirror or what people actually say about me. I know my value. I'm actually here on a dance scholarship. So see? Sometimes when something bad happens, it leads to something good. Noel nodded. Christine looked directly at him. And I do forgive you. You can let it go. I'm fine. Noel's eyes teared up again. He wiped them with the back of his hand. Christine looked over Noel's shoulder. She patted and squeezed his hand. Then he walked out into the hallway and she closed her door. Noel sagged against the wall. That's when he realized he no longer felt a presence lingering nearby. No more feathers. The hallway was silent. His headache was gone. Noel rolled his head from side to side and shrugged, then released his shoulders. His tension was gone too. It was all gone. He felt like he'd just set down a backpack full of bricks. Noel smiled a little and picked his way through the dorm. In the lounge, he waved at the girls. He could see them clearly now. They were dressed in leotards like Christine's. Outside, Noel wasn't surprised to find the sun ploughing its way through the clouds. He closed his eyes and breathed in air scented by the miniature carnations growing in a planter at the edge of the parking area. He hadn't noticed those on the way in. He started towards his car, and his phone rang. Reaching in his pocket, Noel pulled out his phone and answered it. Hello? The first two words spoken into his ear brought Noel to a stop. As he listened, he started grinning. Then he said, I'm on my way. He ran for his car. What? Sam was waiting for Noel in front of the film studies building when Noel got back. Sam! Noel shouted. He ran toward his friend. Sam raised a crutch and waved it in the air, then put it back down when Noel reached him. Noel grabbed Sam and hugged him. As best he could, Sam hugged him back enthusiastically. There's my favourite idiot, Sam said. Where were you? You didn't say. I went... Noel waved the air. It doesn't matter. What happened to you? Sam rolled his eyes. Apparently, I've been hanging around you too long. Idiocy must be catching. Noel smacked Sam's shoulder. Ow! Hey, wounded guy here. Sam winked. Seriously, I was being dumb. I was walking on the tracks with headphones on. Dumb is one word for it. Sam laughed. Yeah, right? So I turned around just in time to see the train and I jumped off the tracks, but jumping has never been something I'm good at. So not only did something on the train hit my arm as I leaped, he lifted a bandage arm. I lost my balance and fell down the embankment and broke my leg. If I'd had normal-sized legs, I probably would have been fine. Noel laughed. You and your legs. Get over it. Sam ignored Noel. I was trying to drag myself back up when I slipped and ended up sliding all the way down into the culvert. Then I passed out. I guess I was pretty well hidden. I never heard anyone calling for me, and no one saw me until early this morning, when my parents came back with a couple cops to search again. Sam punched Noel's arm. I'm so happy to see you, man. Not as happy as I am to see you. Noel realised he meant that, really meant it. I'm sorry. He wasn't taking any chances. Just because Sam was here didn't mean the Blackbird was gone. For what? For being such a jackass about the bullying thing. You're right. It's not funny. Sam waved the air with his crutch again. I was oversensitive about it. It's no big deal. No, Noel said. Being thoughtless is a big deal. Sam shook his head. I won't disagree with that, but I shouldn't have thrown stones at a glass house. Huh? I never answered you when you asked if I had secrets. Noel waited. Sam leaned in. Remember I said I was bullied? Noel nodded. Well, I got revenge on one of my bullies by bullying him right back. I played a really mean joke on him just before freshman year. Jerk, Sam laughed. Back at ya. Nah, Noel said. No more jerk clones. What? Noel laughed. Oh, it's a joke between Amber and me. Amber and me, huh? I want to hear about that. Want to grab a pizza? Sure, I'm starving. I haven't eaten since before noon. Why not? Long story. Maybe I'll tell you sometime. The blackbird will make you tell, Sam said. Noel's heart stuttered, but then Sam. Oh my gosh, I messed up the last line. Noel's heart stuttered, but then Sam laughed. And that is the end of Blackbird. Story 1. Okay. Not the best story, honestly. I wasn't feeling it for much of that. There wasn't much like creep factor. There wasn't much some of the parts were pretty funny. Like I love the consistent joke about the blackbird and like the blood and stuff. And Amber was pretty cool. I really liked the character of Amber. That was really cool. I don't know. It wasn't like a story that stands out to me right now. I think a load of other stories are way better. But what it means, I think it's got something to do with agony and human feelings again. Like because there have been a lot of stories like that, eh? Like with like people feeling like bad or guilty, like in this story, or they've done something bad, and then they get punished for it. I have a feeling that like agony has something to do with that, and it's like human emotions or something. Like I'll need to look into it more, obviously, but a lot of these stories have kind of the same theme, and I felt like this was similar to 1:35 a.m. Maybe not as extreme and as intense, but I think it kind of followed the same kind of plot as 1:35 a.m. for some of it. One thing I do want to say is, like, I recorded this in 4 parts, if you're watching the long video. But, Amber. Amber is a name that we've seen before in Room for One More. I looked at this in a break, and actually Psychic was the one who pointed it out to me. Amber. I'm going to see if I can find it. I really hope I can. But Amber was in Room for One More. She was the person that Stanley had a crush on who worked in the diner. Here it is. It's somewhere here. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's here. So Amber, okay, this is a mini theory. So Amber is a name that we've seen before. Where have we seen her before? In Room for One More. Amber is also in this story, Blackbird. And one of the lines that she says is, "Do you have room for one more?" I rest my case. like that is creepy. That is the creepiest thing in the story. I really like if that was intentional, Scott. That's amazing. Can I just say that's such a cool like I guess Easter egg or cameo, or like such a cool concept that you put in the story. And it does create a connection between Blackbird and Room for One More. Technically, if Amber is the same person, it means that Blackbird comes before Room for One More. I'd assume because they're in high school or they're in college or whatever. Anyway, that is it for the first story of Blackbird. I will be reading the next one, which I believe is The Real Jake or something. I really should know the names of the stories. Yeah, The Real Jake. I'll be reading The Real Jake next, so make sure you stick around for that. And yeah, I will see you then. Goodbye.